A high-value woman doesn't have to scream for attention. She doesn't beg for love. And she doesn't compromise her worth just to keep a man. She knows that how she talks, how she carries herself, and how she sets the tone in every conversation, that's what makes her unforgettable. Tonight, I want to show you exactly how a high-value woman speaks to men, not with fear, not with desperation, but with confidence, clarity, and quiet power. Because the way you talk to a man reveals the way you value yourself. When a high-value woman speaks to a man, her words don't rush, her voice doesn't tremble, and her presence doesn't feel chaotic. She understands something most people overlook. Calm is not weakness. Calm is authority. You see, when you're nervous, when you're unsure of yourself, it shows up in your tone. You start talking faster, raising your pitch, filling the silence with unnecessary words because you're afraid of what the other person might be thinking. But a high-value woman doesn't need to scramble for validation. She doesn't let anxiety drive her words. She talks with a steady pace, with clarity, and with a tone that says, I know who I am, and I don't need to convince you of it. The truth is, men notice energy before they notice anything else. They pay attention not just to what you say, but how you say it. If your voice is restless, if your energy feels desperate, it tells him you're seeking approval. But when your tone is calm, when your body language is composed, it signals confidence. It tells him that you're not dependent on his reaction to feel secure. And that's powerful because it flips the dynamic. Suddenly he's leaning in, listening closer, wondering why you're so grounded when most people are so frantic. Think about it. Have you ever been around someone who radiates calm in the middle of a storm? They don't even need to speak loudly, but when they do, every word carries weight. That's the presence of a high-value woman. She doesn't chase the conversation. She owns it by slowing it down. She lets silence work for her. She doesn't compete for attention. She commands it by being steady. And men respect that because it communicates control, not over him, but over herself. It's not about being cold or detached. It's about being centered. There's a difference between a woman who is silent because she doesn't know what to say and a woman who is silent because she's intentional. A man can feel that difference instantly. When she speaks, it's thoughtful. When she listens, it's with presence. When she pauses, it's with confidence. She's not rushing to fill every space because she knows her presence alone already fills the room. Now here's the part that matters most. Calm authority doesn't just affect how men see you, it affects how you see yourself. When you slow down your tone, when you breathe before responding, when you allow yourself to be steady, you remind yourself that you are in control. You're not reacting, you're leading. And men respect a woman who leads herself first. That's attractive, that's magnetic. Because think about what rushing really communicates. It says, I'm afraid you won't listen unless I prove myself right now. But calm says, I know my worth, and you can take the time to catch up to it. That's a completely different energy. Men don't forget the woman who speaks with that kind of grace. They might meet thousands of women who are beautiful, but very few who are unshaken, composed, and grounded. A high-value woman understands that her tone sets the tone for the entire interaction. If she's frantic, the conversation becomes frantic. If she's calm, the conversation becomes calm. That's why she chooses to lead with peace, because peace is power. And when she carries that calm authority into every conversation, she doesn't just gain respect. She sets herself apart. So remember, the way you speak tells the world how you see yourself. And a high-value woman always speaks like she knows exactly who she is. Words carry weight, and a high-value woman understands that the language she uses shapes the way people see her and the way she sees herself. When she talks to a man, she doesn't use words that sound like she's clinging to him or begging for his presence in her life. She doesn't say things like, I can't live without you, or please don't leave me. Why? Because those words don't just communicate love, they communicate fear. They send the message that her identity, her peace, and her happiness are tied completely to whether he stays or goes. And that's not strength, that's dependency. Instead, a high-value woman chooses words that reinforce her dignity and independence. She says things like, I value honesty in this relationship, or this is what I expect, or even that doesn't work for me. Do you hear the difference? Those are not desperate words. Those are words of respect. Respect for herself and for the relationship. They don't push him away, they invite him to rise to her standard. Because men, whether they admit it or not, respond to the language of strength. They hear confidence and it makes them want to show up stronger. See, it's not about talking down to him. It's not about demanding with aggression. It's about choosing words that say, I know who I am, and I know what I deserve. A high-value woman doesn't weaponize her words, she uses them to create clarity. And clarity is attractive. Clarity takes away the guessing games, it takes away the manipulation, it takes away the drama. She doesn't have to threaten or beg to be heard. She communicates with honesty, and honesty has a quiet kind of power that no game playing can match. Think about how most people communicate when they're scared of losing someone. They plead, they negotiate, they repeat themselves over and over, hoping the other person will take them seriously. But what happens? The more they cling, the less the other person respects the words being said. A high-value woman flips that. She doesn't beg, she states. She doesn't whine, she declares. Her words are rooted in self-respect, and that respect forces the other person to listen differently. Men notice the difference. When a woman speaks with desperation, it's easy to tune out. But when she speaks with certainty, when her language reflects self-assurance, it creates a pause. It makes a man think, this woman knows her worth. I can't play games here. I have to step up. And that's exactly what she wants. Not because she's trying to control him, but because she's creating an environment where only respect can survive. And here's the key, she doesn't just use those words for him, she uses them for herself. The language you use shapes your own mindset. If you constantly speak from fear, you train yourself to believe you're powerless. But if you speak from strength, you remind yourself every time you open your mouth that you're capable, that you're worthy, and that you're not afraid to walk away from anything that diminishes you. That's why she's intentional with every phrase, every sentence, every boundary. She knows that her words set the tone for how she'll be treated. She doesn't waste them on begging. She spends them on building. She builds respect. She builds clarity. She builds trust. And that's what keeps a man listening, keeps him valuing her, keeps him seeing her as different from anyone else he's met. Because at the end of the day, men don't just remember what you said, they remember how your words made them feel. And a high-value woman makes a man feel respect every single time she speaks. There's a big difference between asking for what you need and demanding it out of fear. A high-value woman knows this difference and she practices it every time she speaks to a man. When she communicates her needs, she doesn't come from a place of panic, as if the relationship will collapse if she doesn't get what she wants right this second. Instead, she asks with confidence, as someone who knows her needs are valid and who trusts that the right man will listen and respond. You see, fear-based communication sounds like desperation. It sounds like, why don't you ever? Or, if you loved me, you would. Those phrases come from insecurity, from the fear that she's not enough or that she's about to be abandoned. And when fear drives the words, they don't create closeness, they create defensiveness. The man feels attacked, so he shuts down, withdraws, or pushes back. And then the cycle begins. She feels unheard, he feels nagged, and both walk away frustrated. But a high-value woman doesn't let fear speak for her. She takes a different approach. She knows that her needs matter, so she voices them without apology. She says things like, I'd really appreciate it if you called when you're running late. Or, quality time means a lot to me, and I'd love if we could plan a night together this week. Those are not demands, those are clear, confident requests. And here's the beauty. When she speaks like that, she doesn't lose respect, she gains it. A man hears her words and thinks, She knows what she wants, and she knows how to express it without tearing me down. That's powerful. Confidence in communication doesn't just change the way he listens. It changes the way she feels about herself. Asking with confidence reminds her that she is not powerless in the relationship. She doesn't have to manipulate, beg, or explode to be heard. She only has to speak from a place of certainty. And when you speak with certainty, it sets a tone. It tells the other person, this is what I value. This is what matters to me. And I'm not afraid to say it. And now, here's something important. Asking with confidence also means being prepared for the answer. A high-value woman doesn't crumble if he doesn't give her exactly what she wants. She listens, she evaluates, and she decides if his response aligns with what she needs in the long term. That's strength. That's knowing she has options. Because she's not afraid of hearing no. She's only afraid of betraying herself by staying silent. And men notice this energy. When she asks without fear, it's not just the words, it's the way she holds eye contact, the way her voice doesn't shake, the way she doesn't tack on, but it's okay if you don't want to. She doesn't backtrack. She doesn't soften her needs to keep him comfortable. She trusts that the right man will respect her enough to take her seriously. And even if he doesn't, she knows she's still enough. That's what separates her from the woman who demands out of fear. Her worth isn't tied to the outcome, it's tied to her standard. So instead of saying, you never listen to me, she says, I need to feel heard when I talk to you. Instead of saying, if you don't do this, I'll be upset, she says, this matters to me, and I hope it matters to you too. Those words don't tear down, they build up. They don't shame him, they challenge him to rise higher. And that's the mark of a high-value woman. She speaks her needs with confidence, not because she's afraid of losing him, but because she refuses to lose herself. Silence can feel uncomfortable for a lot of people, especially in relationships. We live in a world where everyone is trying to fill every pause, explain every thought, and talk over each other just to be heard. But a high-value woman understands something most people miss. Silence is not weakness, silence is power. The way she uses it when talking to a man makes all the difference in how he sees her and how he responds to her. When a woman is insecure, she fills the air with nervous chatter. She repeats herself, over-explains her feelings, or tries to talk her way into being understood. But a high-value woman doesn't do that. She knows her words already have value, so she doesn't dilute them by saying the same thing 5 different ways. When she makes her point, she allows silence to follow. And in that silence, the man feels the weight of what she said. He has no choice but to process it because she didn't rush to cover the space and make him comfortable. This is what makes silence so powerful. It forces reflection. It creates gravity. It shows that she is not afraid of him, not afraid of his reaction, and not afraid of waiting for a real answer. That alone communicates confidence, because only someone secure in themselves can handle silence without panicking. Think about it. When someone says something and immediately rushes to fill the pause, it shows they're worried the other person won't agree. But when someone says something and lets it sit, it shows they believe in their own words. Men notice that energy. They notice when a woman can make a point and hold eye contact without rushing to defend it. That kind of presence makes a man stop and think. It communicates, I said what I said, and I mean it. And here's the truth, most men aren't used to that. They're used to women who over-explain, who chase their attention, who try to fix the silence so it doesn't feel awkward. A high-value woman doesn't do that. She embraces the pause. She allows him to be the one who leans into it. And that small difference changes the entire dynamic. Silence also protects her. Because when you're always rushing to fill the air, you end up saying things you don't mean, things you regret, or things that weaken your position. But when you know how to hold silence, you give yourself time to think, to choose your words, and to keep control of the moment. That's why silence isn't punishment. It's wisdom. It's self-control. It's the discipline of knowing that not everything requires an immediate reaction. And let's be honest, silence can be far louder than words. When a high-value woman chooses not to respond to disrespect, when she lets a thoughtless comment hang in the air instead of engaging with it, that silence becomes a mirror. It makes the man face what he just said or did without her needing to argue or explain. That's impact. That's strength without raising her voice. The most attractive thing about this is that it never comes from arrogance. It comes from security. She doesn't stay silent to manipulate. She stays silent because she knows her worth doesn't depend on constant validation. She's not afraid of the space between words. She trusts that her presence alone already communicates everything that needs to be said. And that's why silence, in her hands, isn't empty. It's intentional. It's powerful. It's what makes her voice, when she finally chooses to use it again, matter even more. There's something magnetic about a woman who shows up exactly as she is. No performance, no mask, no act, just her, raw and authentic. A high-value woman doesn't waste her time playing roles just to impress a man because she knows the cost of pretending is always too high. When you perform, you're constantly managing a version of yourself instead of living in your truth. And eventually, the mask slips. But when you're authentic, there's nothing to slip, nothing to hide, nothing to keep up with. That's why authenticity is so powerful. It's sustainable. It lasts. Men can feel when someone is performing. They might not always be able to put it into words, but they sense it. The exaggerated laugh, the forced agreement, the constant need to be agreeable or pleasing, those things might work for a little while, but they don't build respect. They create comfort for the other person at the expense of your own truth. A high-value woman isn't interested in that kind of comfort. She'd rather be real and risk rejection than perform and trap herself in a lie. When she talks to a man, her words align with her values. She doesn't say, "I'm fine," when she's not fine, just to avoid conflict. She doesn't agree with opinions she doesn't believe in, just to seem easygoing. She doesn't fake interest in things she has no care for. Instead, she communicates honestly. If something bothers her, she says it with respect. If she doesn't agree, she voices her perspective. And if she loves something, she shares it with passion. That kind of honesty creates connection because it's real, and real connection is the only kind worth having. Authenticity also shows up in the way she carries herself. She doesn't try to exaggerate her worth by pretending to be someone else, because she already knows her worth is enough. That quiet confidence is attractive because it's rare. Most people are busy trying to be who they think others want, but a high-value woman flips that. She challenges a man to meet her where she truly is, rather than lowering herself into a version he might prefer. That's not arrogance. It's self-respect. And here's what makes it even stronger: authenticity is freeing. When she's authentic, she doesn't have to constantly monitor how she comes across. She doesn't walk away from conversations replaying every word, wondering if she said the right thing. She doesn't have to live in fear that he'll see through her act, because there is no act. That freedom creates ease, and that ease is what makes her presence so refreshing. Men respect a woman who isn't afraid to show her truth. It doesn't mean she's harsh or unkind. It means she's real. It means if she says she's interested, she is. If she says she's not okay, she's honest enough to say it. If she sets a boundary, she sticks to it. That's what makes her voice credible. That's what makes her presence trustworthy. And trust is the foundation of every strong relationship. What's powerful about authenticity is that it doesn't just draw the right man closer, it filters out the wrong ones. A man who can't handle her truth will fade, and that's a gift, because she doesn't want a relationship built on her pretending. She wants one built on her being fully seen. And the man who values her will stay, not because of a performance, but because of her reality. That's why authenticity will always be more attractive than perfection. Perfection is fake. Authenticity is rare, and a high-value woman knows she'd rather be rare than replaceable. One of the clearest signs of a high-value woman is the way she ends a conversation. She doesn't drag it out, she doesn't spiral into over-explaining, and she doesn't beg for understanding. She knows when it's time to close her mouth, step back, and walk away with grace. That doesn't mean she's dismissive or cold. It means she respects herself too much to stay in a space where her words are wasted or her energy is drained. Ending a conversation with grace is an art. It's not about shutting down. It's not about slamming the door. It's about recognizing when the point has been made, when the discussion is no longer productive, and when continuing would only chip away at her peace. In those moments, she doesn't cling to being right, she clings to her dignity. And that's what makes her unforgettable. Think about how many people argue until their voices crack, trying to force the other person to see their perspective. They repeat themselves, they chase closure, they exhaust themselves, hoping for a different outcome. But a high-value woman doesn't waste her words like that. If she's expressed herself clearly and with respect, that's enough. She doesn't keep explaining just to be understood by someone who's unwilling to understand. She knows that staying calm and closing the conversation with composure is far more powerful than dragging it into chaos. This is what sets her apart. Because desperation in communication shows up when someone doesn't know how to let go. They fight until the last word because they're terrified of being unheard. But a high-value woman doesn't fear being unheard because she's already spoken her truth. She doesn't fear silence because she knows silence can be louder than arguing. And she doesn't fear walking away because she trusts that her value doesn't depend on winning every conversation. Men notice that. They notice when a woman can disagree without disrespect, when she can say, "I've said what I needed to say, and I'll leave it there." Instead of dragging the moment out, that kind of composure makes a man take her more seriously, because it shows she has self-control. She's not easily pulled into emotional traps. She's not giving him the satisfaction of seeing her unravel. She exits on her terms, and that leaves a lasting impression. What's even more important is how it feels for her. Ending with grace gives her peace. It protects her energy. It reminds her that she doesn't have to prove her worth through endless debate. And when she practices that consistently, she creates a standard, one that says, "I don't stay where my respect isn't being met. I don't stay where my peace is being drained. And I don't waste my words on ears that refuse to listen." And here's the beauty. By ending with grace, she actually commands more respect in the long run. Because when someone sees you walk away calmly, without anger and without begging, they realize you're not dependent on their validation. You're not tied to their reaction. You stand on your own. And that kind of independence is magnetic because it shows that no matter what happens, you are unshaken. So when a high-value woman ends a conversation, she doesn't leave behind desperation. She leaves behind dignity. And that is what makes her unforgettable,